All over Gaza, families are scrambling for survival.
There's no bread, there's nothing. I've been here since 8 in the morning just to get one plate for 6 people. But it's not even enough for one person. 6 people, each gets 1 spoon or 2, which barely satisfies the hunger we're experiencing.
This father of 4 is trying to provide for his wife, their children, and his brother's children. They are grateful for this lentil soup, which will be the only thing they eat today. After an almost 3-month blockade, the UN says more than 100 trucks have been granted permission to enter Gaza, carrying flour, supplies for soup kitchens, baby food and medical aid. Aid agencies are calling it a drop in the ocean, saying 500 trucks are needed every day. The UN says the limited quantity also makes the deliveries more susceptible to looting.
Past experience has very clearly showed that the less aid you get in and the less there is properly distributed in Gaza, the more desperation rises.
This woman says she is yet to see any help.
The amount of aid they are speaking about is not enough for anyone. People would fight over it even if it came. I wish aid would just come and people could share it among each other.
Israel is pressing on with its military expansion. The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says more than 500 people have been killed in the past 8 days. Around the world, pressure is growing on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. More than 20 of Israel's allies signed a letter demanding the full resumption of aid into Gaza immediately, including Britain, where today the Prime Minister went further, calling the situation utterly intolerable.
I want to put on record today that we're horrified by the escalation from Israel. So we must coordinate our response, because this war has gone on for far too long. We cannot allow the people of Gaza to starve.
The United Kingdom has suspended free trade negotiations with Israel and summoned Israel's ambassador.
The UK has announced that it's pausing free trade talks with Israel and imposing further sanctions against West Bank settlers in protest at Israel's actions in Gaza. Foreign Secretary David Lammy also announced that he'll summon Israel's ambassador over what Mr. Lammy described as the intolerable offensive in the Gaza Strip. Israel says it has loosened its 11-week blockade of medical, food and fuel supplies into Gaza, but last week announced an expansion of its military operations in the territory. Meanwhile, Israel says 93 trucks carrying aid entered Gaza on Tuesday. The first group of trucks carrying humanitarian supplies, including baby food, crossed into the territory through the Kerem Shalom crossing. Israel has been blockading all food, medicine and other aid from reaching people there for nearly 3 months. 5 aid trucks got into the territory on Monday. Mustafa Barghouti is a Palestinian activist, politician and doctor who serves as Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative political party. He's a member of the Palestinian Legislative Council and a member of the Palestine Liberation Organization Central Council. He joins us from Ramallah in the West Bank. Welcome to DW. Can we start with your reaction to today's announcement by the UK that it's taking action over against Israel over its 11-week blockade of aid into Gaza?
I think we are witnessing a turning point at the international level regarding what's happening in Gaza. I think the whole world is fed up with the massacres that are taking place there. The fact that the United Nations said today that 14,000 children, Palestinian children, could die in hours because of starvation on Gaza, and the fact that hundreds are dying by Israeli bombardment continuously, this is moving the world. And in addition to that, we have seen huge demonstrations, 600,000 people in London, more than 100,000 in Holland, the largest demonstration since 20 years. What we see is a tsunami, actually, a tsunami of international protest and maybe a tsunami of sanctions on Israel because of the 3 war crimes it is committing during the last 19 months. The war crime of genocide, the war crime of collective punishment, and the war crime of ethnic cleansing. And I think what made the big wave, not only the public pressure that is happening, but also the Israeli declared policy by Israeli ministers that reached a level of declaring openly that their intention is the total ethnic cleansing of the population of Gaza.
Okay. So you talked about genocide, collective punishment, and ethnic cleansing, which will hopefully be decided by an international court at some stage. But why now? Because we have heard of deaths. We have heard of thousands of deaths. We have seen hundreds of protests around the world. So what is it about now that seems to be moving the international community to say, enough, no more, stop this?
I think 3 factors have contributed to that. First of all, nobody can hide the crime anymore. It is all over the world on social media. People are seeing the reality of what's happening, seeing the children being killed, the Israeli army shooting and killing children for fun. They're seeing the starvation that people are suffering from, and they've seen the horrible destruction. So first factor is the truth. The truth got to people regardless of the Israeli propaganda and the American bias to Israel. Second factor, Israel has failed in breaking Palestinian resistance. Although the world has given Israel maybe 19 months, and and many countries like Britain, United States, Germany, and others continued to supply Israel with weapons and bombs that are used against the civilian population. Israel has failed in breaking the Palestinian resistance or breaking the Palestinian resilience and our determination to stay in our land, regardless of all the atrocities and the huge suffering we are having and the huge losses. But finally, the third factor is definitely the public reaction of Europe. These huge demonstrations that are happening all over Europe, and the people in the streets are repeating probably the phenomena that we have seen in protest against the war on Vietnam or the apartheid system in South Africa. It's the same mechanism. It starts with the people, the streets, then it affects the parliaments, and then eventually it affects the positions of the governments. That's exactly what's happening. And by the way, the change is also happening in the States. At the level of the public, there is a huge discrepancy now, a huge gap between the position of the American administration or Congress and the people of the United States.
And we'll come to that. Just in your last answer there, you talked about Israeli soldiers killing children for fun. This is not... just substantiate that. Where does that come from?
Well, it comes from Yair Golan. Yair Golan is the... used to be the deputy head of the Israeli army, the deputy chief of staff of the Israeli army. And he's now heading a party called the Democrats. Yair Golan said today that Israel is moving very quickly into becoming a pariah state, and that this is happening because the Israeli army is allowing its soldiers to kill children to make as a hobby. That's exactly, these are the words of Yair Golan, who used to be the deputy head of the Israeli army.
I saw those quotes, and I see them being dismissed and disputed by the Israeli government. So at least you've...
The Israeli government...
That's fine. That's fine. At least you've put it into context
just
for
to
us.
tell you one sentence.
Okay.
The Israeli government is now accusing Yair Golan, who used to be the deputy head of the Israeli army, of being anti-Semite. Can you believe that? That tells you how crazy this Israeli government is becoming and how fascist this Israeli government is becoming.
So much of what Israel has done in Gaza is, they say, to pressure Hamas into making concessions during ceasefire negotiations as a step towards the ultimate goal, they say, of securing the return of Israeli hostages and destroying Hamas's military and political infrastructure. Can there be Palestinian unity without Hamas?
No. Palestinian unity should include everybody. But the issue here is not Hamas. Hamas declared and told us many times that they don't want to be in the government or they don't want to be the government. We already agreed in Beijing for forming a national consensus government that consists of independents without Hamas being in the government. But that government should be for both West Bank and Gaza. That agreement was signed in July by all Palestinian parties, and it should be implemented. And that's the way for the so-called day after in Gaza, because it would allow the possibility of reconstruction of Gaza, but also such a government will have to prepare for free democratic elections where Palestinians, like all people in the world, like German people or British people, or even Israeli people, have the chance to choose their leaders freely and democratically. That's the way forward. But regarding pressure on Hamas to achieve ceasefire and to release the Israeli captives, it's there. Hamas declared they are ready to give back all the Israeli captives immediately, not in chunks, not in portions, but immediately, all of them, in return for stopping the war and the release of a certain number of Palestinian prisoners. By the way, the number of Palestinian prisoners now is 10,100 in Israeli jails, not including many people from Gaza who are kept in concentration camps by Israel. So I don't know why people don't speak about our prisoners as well, who include 400 children who are captives also by Israel, and who include about 4,000 people who are put under administrative detention, which means they are jailed without knowing why, without charges, without a due legal process. Anyhow, we want all the captives out. Israel could get them immediately if they want, if they accept a ceasefire. But that's exactly what Netanyahu doesn't want, because Netanyahu doesn't care about the Israeli captives. That's what the families of the Israeli captives are saying.
Finally, and very briefly, if you wouldn't mind, I'm aware that you're an advocate of non-violent resistance. I wonder what you feel when you hear Israel, backed by the United States, say that it wants to clear Palestinians out of Gaza and take over the whole territory. Can that be resisted without violence?
I believe in nonviolence. I believe in democracy. I believe in human rights. Not because we don't have the right to resist Israel in every possible way according to international law. International law says that people under occupation, people who are threatened with ethnic cleansing, have the right to resist, even in military forms, as long as they respect international law and international humanitarian law. But I believe in nonviolence because I believe it's the most effective way in our case. Nevertheless, I think it's time for the world to stop this crime as you have described it, the ethnic cleansing of the people of Gaza. That is the worst crime, not only in modern history, but in history in general, and it should be stopped. And this Israeli fascist government should be stopped. And I can see that there is now a tsunami of solidarity with Palestine, unprecedented, and I hope it will be effective.
Thank you for joining us, a Palestinian politician and activist, Mustafa Barghouti. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're joined now by Dr. Hellyer. He's a Senior Associate Fellow in Security Studies at the Royal United Services Institute in London and is currently based in Cairo. Good to have you with us. The UK is pausing trade talks with Israel. The EU is reviewing its trade agreement. Is this likely to influence Israel's actions in Gaza, do you think?
Thank you for having me. So when it comes to the EU move today, it wasn't the pausing of trade. It was actually the EU-Israel association agreement. So it's quite a wide kind of relationship. And it's issued a review. So it's agreed to review. It wasn't a unanimous decision. It was the majority out of EU members, but it wasn't a consensus decision, but it was a majority. And I think it sends a very tough signal to the Israelis, the first in this 19-month war on Gaza, many asking why it took so long for this to take place. Whether or not it will lead to any changes on the ground from the Israelis is another question. The Israelis prioritize, of course, its ties with the United States it's the United States that would be able to force a change in behavior on the side of Tel Aviv. But this is definitely a strong signal, the strongest signal, I think, that we've seen over the past 2 years.
Yeah, you talk about the United States. Are we seeing a meaningful shift in policy from Israel's allies?
Well, we're seeing a change in policy from some of Israel's allies, particularly in Europe, not so much in the United States. When it comes to the United States, at least vis-a-vis Israel's war on Gaza, I don't think we see a meaningful change as of yet. There have been other changes that have taken place vis-a-vis the relationship, and you've seen that when it comes to, for example, the United States' decision to enter into a truce with the Houthis in Yemen, to proceed with talks with the Iranians. The Israelis were not happy about how either of those have gone. But when it comes to the actual change in policy on Gaza, that remains to be seen. The United States currently has a very strong policy of support vis-a-vis Israel when it comes to that war in Gaza. A meaningful change would mean, for example, changes at the UN Security Council. It would mean a change in terms of the supply of offensive arms, none of which seems to be on the table at present.
So before we get to that point, from the Security Council point of view, there is this growing effort now to exert influence from the UK and the EU. To what degree, though, does Israel actually respond to concerns raised by these groups?
Well, they have responded. They've responded very angrily. They've said things like, these European partners have to consider their colonial past, which is quite interesting because, of course, Israel is moving forward with settlements in the West Bank, a colonial enterprise by any other name. But in terms of the war on Gaza, I don't expect it to be an immediate shift if all that continues is simply these sorts of statements. The sanctions that were mentioned by the UK were on a very small number of settlers in the West Bank. It doesn't seem to have engendered a change in policy from the Israelis. There'd have to be a lot more that takes place in order for Israel to change course.
As Israel faces this growing criticism from its allies over its actions in Gaza, it has recalled its senior ceasefire negotiators from Doha. What should we make of that move?
Very symbolic because those negotiations had no mandate to do any deal in Doha. It wasn't as though we were on some sort of cusp of a breakthrough or anything like that. The Israelis have made it very clear over the past 19 months that the course of action with Gaza is to continue to prosecute this war. Over the past few months, they've expressed quite openly and very transparently the desire to depopulate Gaza of its Palestinian population and to control aid in a way that has led to fears of famine and starvation across the Gaza Strip, leading the UN relief chief, Tom Fletcher, to actually say earlier today that if aid doesn't get into Gaza ASAP, then we can expect thousands, they mentioned 14,000 children to die due to starvation.
Dr. Hellyer from the Royal United Services Institute, great to get your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.